Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're delighted to be back at the center and talking about the fun world of politics. The midterm elections are just under a month away, and there is a lot going on. To give a little bit of historical context, the last 5 presidents, Clinton through Biden, all took office with their party controlling both houses of Congress. Most, but not all, lost seats in their first midterm, many losing both houses. So Bill Clinton lost 52 House seats and 8 Senate seats. George Bush actually picked up 8 House seats and 2 Senate seats in 2002. Barack Obama lost 63 House seats and 6 Senate seats in 2010. And Donald Trump lost 40 House seats, but picked up 2 Senate seats in 2018. So this year, it's hard to know. Our good friend and neighbor Larry Sabato's crystal ball right now projects 214 Republican seats that are either leaning, likely, or safe in the GOP camp, giving them just 4 seats shy of a majority. 195 leaning, likely, or safe Democratic seats and 26 toss-ups. And right now the crystal ball has it 49-49. For both houses with 2 toss-ups, Georgia and Nevada. And then, of course, there are governor and state level races, particularly state legislatures, also on the ballot, although, as we've discussed, those aren't technically midterms. Those are real terms for those governors involved. So these factors, combined with polling inaccuracies, a whole slew of economic, social, and other political issues, as well as a sitting president and a former president who who are not technically on the ballot, but may or may not be in voters' minds, will certainly affect the outcome of the race. And to sort through all of that, we've got 4 terrific Miller Center family members here to discuss it. On my immediate left, but my political right, my former UVA, we weren't quite classmates, Mary. We were 1 year apart from each other. Mary Kate Carey is a senior fellow here at the Miller Center, a UVA grad, and a former speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush. While I was rearranging the deck chairs on the Dukakis Titanic, Mary Kate was on the sailing ship of state, soon to become a speechwriter for then President Bush. Today, she writes for news services, including The Hotline and U.S. News and World Report. She also teaches a speechwriting class in the UVA politics department that my intern, Grady Martin, tells me is very, very popular.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
Note the name, Grady Martin. Exams are coming soon.
Oh, okay, got it.
Okay. Mary Kate also co-taught a class in 2020 with our other panelist, Jennifer Lawless, on the 2020 election. And I gather there's plans for future collaboration as well. Clarence Page, to Mary Kate's left, your right, perhaps the other order in political terms, is a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist who received the Lifetime Achievements Awards from the National Society of Newspaper Columnists, the Chicago Headline Club, and the National Association of Black Journalists. And he also serves on the Miller Center Governing Council, and we're really excited to welcome him in person for the first time since we've all been living in COVID for the last set of years. Jennifer Lawless is a Miller Center faculty senior fellow and the George Spicer Professor of Politics at UVA. Her research has been on a range of different political issues, including women in politics, as well as the demise of local media. And as I mentioned before, has co-taught with Mary Kate. And then finally, John Harris is the founder and former editor-in-chief of Politico. He was for many years a reporter at the Washington Post, including having been White House correspondent. And those were the years that I worked at the White House, though I was not a source, no matter what he says. He did a turn both at Brookings and the German Marshall Fund, where I got to work with John when he was writing his terrific biography of Bill Clinton, The Survivor. He's had over a 30-year career in covering Virginia and DC politics, including in Richmond. And he's also a member of the Miller Center Governing Council, and also his first in-person appearance here, at least as a member of the council. So it's terrific to have all four of them with us, and I'm going to kick it off by asking them each two questions, one round on each question. We'll see where we are time-wise. We welcome your audience questions. So if you're here in the audience with us today, please write them on a card and pass them to our terrific staff, and they'll get them up to me. If you're out there online, send them in the Q&A, and our team is monitoring that, and they'll also get them here to the stage. So first question to the group, and we'll go in this order, and then on the second question, we'll come back in reverse order. What are the big issues single issue, maybe go to two, that you think are going to dominate the midterm elections, or at least have if not dominate, have the pivotal impact on the elections? So Mary Kate.
Okay. I'm really glad to go first because I think this answer is obvious. We'll see what everybody else says. I think you have to go especially after yesterday's numbers with the economy. It's number one. You may have heard on the news, 8.2% inflation, 6.5% on core CPI, which is the ones without gas and food. And the mortgage rates now for 30-year fixed are just under 8%. And I think it is a massive issue for just about every voter in America. So I would go with that. Gallup polling shows, they asked an interesting question they've been doing for 30 years. Which party better handles the most important problem to you? And so they don't say what the problem is, just which one will handle it better. And Gallup's got 48 to 37 in favor of the Republicans. Then when they go to now, what is the most important issue to you? The plurality, 38% said the economy. Of the non-economic issues that people listed as their most important, because it was just open-ended, it wasn't a multiple choice. The second issue under non-economic is leadership in the government and lack of leadership in the government. Which goes to, I would say, Biden's approval ratings, even though his numbers are inching up. The number of people who said that open-ended, I think, is pretty amazing. And I assume that's coming from the economic numbers as well. The only other thing I would add is the crime issue, I think is big and across the board. I think it explains a lot of the shift we're seeing in demographic groups switching to Republicans. 1 million people in 43 states have switched their registration to Republican. And I think has a lot to do with crime in the economy. So those are the two I would pick.
Clarence?
Well, like everything else these days, I see two different answers, one for the Democrats, one for the Republicans. I'd say on the Republican side, I fully agree that the economy is up there as number one, and the crime issue right behind it. I'll be delighted to talk about that because I talk about it every day around not only in DC, but on their campaign trail that I have seen. At the same time, though, on the Democratic side, while the economy and crime are important, I think, as my neighbor lady, nice Democratic lawyer activist says, Rovember is the issue. Is this the election that is going to begin the reversal of Roe, set up Congress so that it will be more favorable toward Democratic appointees in the future? And I'd say that because of the other issues going on right now, particularly crime and the economy, that it doesn't look that great for the Dems, but they are relentless.
Jen?
Yeah, I shockingly disagree with Mary Kate.
That's all we do.
I know, it really is. Very civil, very civil. So I would say that it's abortion, because although the economy does rank as the most important issue. And that is the case for Democrats and Republicans across the board. That's always the case. And the overwhelming majority of partisans still vote for their party. So when I'm thinking about the most important issue, I'm not thinking about the issue that's most important on a daily basis. I'm thinking about the issue that has the potential to really be pivotal in this election. And the reason I think it's abortion is because if you look at the special elections that we've had since Dobbs, we've seen not only Democrats outperform Biden in those districts, but we've also seen record levels of new voter turnout. So while it's the case that nationwide there have been hundreds of thousands of people who have affiliated with the Republican Party, perhaps because of crime, we've seen at least the same number of new registrants who are now motivated to vote for the first time and did turn out in these special elections because they feel like their bodily autonomy is being restricted. And the reason I think this is a little bit different than previous elections where abortion was thought to be an important issue, like 2014, when Todd Akin and Richard Murdoch said things like, there's no such thing as, that there is legitimate and illegitimate rape. The reason it's a little bit different this time is because Roe versus Wade was overturned. So it's not a hypothetical anymore about what life would look like under a world with no Roe. It really is happening. And so I think it's the Democrats' only chance to hold the House. And if I were them, I would be running those ads in pivotal districts across the country in every slot they could possibly get from now until November 8th.
John?
Well, even though some of our panelists disagreed, Bill, I have to say, like, I didn't disagree with anything I heard from all three. And in particular, that I thought I would maybe just try to synthesize.
It's my kind of board member.
Synthesize some of the things I heard, look, and put it in at least what I see in the context of 2022. This is a really interesting midterm election because it has dynamics that are not fully familiar to us in midterm elections. We're used to thinking of midterm elections as a referendum election. What do I think about how the president is doing? What do I think about what I see in my daily life with prices or with crime? Because we're in such a polarized moment, because the ex-president has not done what most ex-presidents do and just recede into the mists, but is still I'd say he's the second most influential figure in American life in terms of driving the political conversation. We have something more like a choice election. That it's not just simply an up or down referendum on the party that holds the White House. And we're now very accustomed in politics of something that was really novel when we encountered it in 1994 with this big wave election that dislodges entrenched power. Now that's very routine. We typically see elections being changed elections, and we're accustomed to control of the Congress changing rapidly. We're accustomed to waves. But what I think we have right now is potentially not so much a wave election, but like a multiple wave election. I agree that the Dobbs decision is potentially transformative on politics. I also agree that the political character of the country that was on such a vivid display in 2016 and 2020 is still the fundamental dynamic, the difficulties of Democrats competing with rural voters, the intensity of pro and con feeling towards specific personalities. That also represents a wave. So we've got these kind of crashing waves that point in different ways. And I think one result of it is, from political journalism point of view, is it's interesting. We don't actually know for sure what's going to happen. If you said in the spring, pre-Dobbs, well, the Democrats are going to for sure lose the House. I'd say right now, well, probably going to lose the House because of the math you cited. They just simply have to, or from Larry, they've just simply got too many close races that they'd have to win. That's probably the case. And the Senate, it's really anybody's guess. And there's a handful of elections that are anybody's guess. So it makes it interesting. I don't think it's funny that you wouldn't think of it as a stalemate election, because that you might say, well, that's in kind of settled times or in unsettled times. We're in radicalized times, but nonetheless, those radical currents are pointing in somewhat different directions.
Got it. Okay, John. So with that, and you got closer to this, but maybe focus us on a few key races that you're watching. What are the ones that you think will be bellwethers. What are the ones you can't take your eyes off of, even if you'd like to?
That last one's easy. I enjoy watching Jeopardy every night at 7:30 in the Washington market, and it's glutted with political campaigns. But I think I would be interested in this race, even if it wasn't, just because it's close to home in Virginia. But Will Allison Spanberger, who's an attractive, disciplined candidate.
UVA grad,
What's that?
Mhm.
UVA grad.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So there's somebody who you say, well, that's if Democrats can claw their way back in districts that have been challenging for them. She's got to be able to win. She's in a very, very tight race against a former Prince William supervisor, I think. But the ad money, and it's come in big late, is tying her to Nancy Pelosi. It's trying to say, look, don't be confused. Do you think that Alison Spanberger is the kind of person that represents you, that she's a Virginia Democrat? She's a national Democrat, really tying her to Nancy Pelosi. So if Democrats are going to hang on, they need a lot of Alison Spanberger and people like in situations like her to do really well. I'm watching that. I'm watching Georgia in the Senate. It seems to me that somebody taken at random out of a phone book would probably be a more competitive candidate for the Republicans than Herschel Walker. And that may not matter for the reasons that I said before. It's Tip O'Neill back the generation, now almost 2 generations ago, all politics is local, how to candidate strength, how they're responding to the dynamics of the district. I think for the past generation, and especially true now, all politics is national. Herschel Walker's his defects as a candidate, or the problems in his personal life may not matter in a hyper polarized environment. Which side are you on? Certainly going to watch the Wisconsin governor's race there, where Democrats hold that governorship. Can they keep it? Even as Wisconsin is the state where you see this steep erosion in their ability to compete in rural areas.
Jen, what are you watching?
So I'm obsessed with Georgia also. I mean, I love it when Herschel Walker says things like, well, I can't really expect to do well at this debate because my opponent has all these fancy words and fancy clothes. So the debate's tonight. I encourage everybody to watch it. I want to see what words Raphael Warnock uses. Basically, this is a situation where both sides have got 48% of the vote, and that's where they're stuck, right? So the race is going to be over this 4%. And you've got a pretty compelling, very dynamic candidate in Warnock and a very, very flawed candidate in Walker, and it doesn't seem to matter. So I think that that's really interesting. On the House side, I would say there are 2 races. The first is the type of race like Tom Malinowski's running in New Jersey, which is you've got these suburban districts where you had highly educated, mostly female voters turn out in 2018 for the Democrats, not turn out for Biden in 2020, but not necessarily in the congressional races. Where they go in 2022 is going to decide these House races.
Or if they go, if they stay home, if they.
Right.
if
And so
they turn out.
there's a subset of them are these silent senior women who are apparently particularly perturbed about the decision to overturn Roe. And if they turn out, that might well be enough. It's a requirement for the recipe for the Democrats to hold. We'll see what happens. And then the other House race that I'm looking at is personal. So in Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District, Jim Langevin retired. I ran against him in 2006 in the primary and lost. Democrats have held that district since Claudine Schneider left it in the late 90s. And there's a competitive race going on right there. So the Democratic candidate, Seth Magaziner, is the general treasurer. He should be winning. And instead, Alan Fung, who was a mayor of a large city in Rhode Island, has been up in 2 pretty crummy polls. But even in a crummy poll, I'd rather be up than down. So, this is competitive. The Republicans are saying that they see a path to victory through New England. I don't buy it. But if I were the Democrats, I'd be nervous that they have to focus on races like this.
Clarence?
Well, as in Ohio, and I'm watching the J.D. Vance, who not only is from Ohio, but as I am originally, but also the same hometown. And in 2016, when Donald Trump surprised me by carrying Ohio, I turned to my fellow correspondents and I said, "Well, what's the deal here?" And one of them said, "Have you read Hillbilly Elegy?" Which I had not. I was the last American to read it, from what I understand now. And I said, well, if you want to understand Trump voters, read Hillbilly Elegy. So I went and found Hillbilly Elegy, opened it up and found it's my hometown. JD grew up there about 30 years after I did. It was just the reverse. When I grew up there, it was the heart of the Rust Belt, or it was the heart of the Steel Belt, and a great city of opportunity and hometown of the McGuire sisters. For those of you who remember the McGuire sisters, right, they're here. And it was in any case, it was a quite a revelation, and I met JD, and we talked about what had happened, all the economic devastation, the social decay, the drug addiction, all this that had come along in those years. And I said, you know, for the first time, I feel lucky to be born Black, because the life of poor white folks in Middletown, let alone others, was so bleak. It became very apparent to me why people were looking for something, anything. And Middletown and the Ohio voted for Obama twice, et cetera. You know, classic swing area. So when JD disappointed me by well, I wasn't disappointed they ran for the Senate. I think he would make a good old school Republican. When he then went for Trump's endorsement. After all of the sniping he did about Trump before, I was very disappointed, but also realistically, you know, if you want to go for a Republican nomination, you've got to get Trump's endorsement. And so that was a very obvious functional decision. I think there were about 7 in the primary at that time, 7 Republicans, and he wasn't even in the top 3 or 4. And of course, as soon as he got Trump's endorsement, he got the nomination, and then he kind of went into the shadows for a while. Everybody was talking about JD's low profile, while his opponent Ryan is a quite dynamic guy from a Rust Belt town in the northern Ohio, Youngstown. But is very much of the anti-Trump in terms of style as well as its presentation. So I was very interested in the debate they had last week, which was not decisive. I think there's I still see the same kind of divide happening. It's possible for either one to carry the state now, and I think that's going to be a bellwether for the country, like Ohio used to be back when we actually switched parties between elections.
I think, if I remember correctly, Cristobal has that leans Republican, but it's still close. It's not a toss-up.
Right.
Mary Kate?
So before I say my race, I would say I'm a little more optimistic than Professor Sabato is on the Republican chances in the Senate. And I'm basing that on how many times I think the polls have been wrong in the last 2 cycles. There was a great interview in the National Review of Robert Cahaly, who's the head of Trafalgar. And why does he seem to be able to get it right? And he gives all the reasons what's going on with polling. So just say that I'm cautiously optimistic on the Senate. For the House, I agree with John. I'm a Virginia native, and I'm got my eye on 2 or 3 House races in the Virginia side, and Virginia 2nd District, which is Jen Kiggins and Elaine Luria. And the 7th district, which is Spanberger and Yesli Vega, who you were talking about. There's another one in the 10th district, which is Hung Cao. I don't know if you see his signs as you come down through Warrenton. And the reason I'm interested in those is you were asking about bellwether elections. And I think all 3 of those are bellwethers because all 3 of the Democratic incumbents voted with the Biden administration 99 to 100% of the time in the last year. And they're going to have to defend those votes. And as Jen was saying, when you see all these ads during Jeopardy and you see how many of them are going for abortion, it's because those are the ones on the left. They know that energizes their base. Donald Trump energizes 100% of the base on the left. He only energizes maybe 30% of the base on the right. So the more they can bring Trump and abortion into it, that's their way of trying to boost their turnout. Because I think, to my earlier point, they realize the numbers they're facing on the economy and crime are pretty stiff. And so if those 3 Democratic incumbents can survive this election with their voting records, I think that's going to tell you a lot. I will say one more thing, which is in the Spanberger race, Yesli Vega, nobody seems to talk about the fact that Biden won the district by 7 points. Youngkin won it by 11. So big swing in that district. And there's a very big Hispanic population in the district where Yesli Vega is running. And that could be another bellwether, because the numbers we're seeing on Hispanics crossing over to the Republican Party, it's pretty amazing. And that could be where the ground zero of it is in that district.
You mentioned Trump. It's the first time anyone here has mentioned the former president's name. I'm just curious to get everybody's take on how much this election will or won't be a referendum on Biden or on Trump. Typically, former presidents don't become, it's often the case, as I said at the outset, that a sitting president is on the ballot in the midterm, even if their name doesn't appear. It's not so common that a former president's on the ballot. So how much is that the case this time around?
Are we still going in order?
We can go in whatever order. Somebody
Okay.
wants to jump
Anybody
in,
want
take
to
that one.
take that one?
Go ahead.
I think it's baked in. I mean, if you look at the Republican candidates, more than half of them believe that the 2020 election was stolen and rigged. And they can't.
Or at least there was a terrific argument to sort of parse that out. Some believe, but some talk about election rules having been changed in advance. They're casting doubt on it as a way
They're
of
even worse.
playing.
If you're a true believer and you believe this nonsense, all right, I'll give you credit and you can be educated. The people who know better and are out there spewing it should be ashamed of themselves. And they're running for Secretary of State, they're running for governor, they're running for Congress. And as a result, this is baked into the election. So every time somebody casts a ballot, they're basically casting a ballot for somebody who does or does not believe that Trump stole, that Biden stole the election. And the fact that these Republican candidates can't move away from it and are unwilling to, advocate for election integrity in a way that's consistent with the way that the 2020 election turned out and that there was no evidence of fraud, I think highlights that Trump is ever present. And in some ways, he might even be more present than Biden is, because Democrats are trying to run on Biden's accomplishments, but distance themselves from Biden on the economy. Many of these Republican candidates are trying to run as a way to get Trump to become elected president again in 2024 and to return to Trump's agenda. So, I think it's not a referendum in that it's Biden versus Trump exactly, but it's hard to see Trump missing from almost any of these races. He's also campaigning for candidates that aren't asking him to, right? Like, he has this thing where he shows up and conducts rallies for candidates that wish he wouldn't. So it's difficult to suggest that, he's in the.
He did that with Youngkin.
Mhm.
Somebody you may remember.
And it worked.
It
So, I think I think he's ever present.
Bill, if we've got the contest in 3 weeks or 3+ weeks of the midterms, and then there's going to be another really interesting contest, which is going to be the recrimination campaign, because it's certainly the building in both parties. And how it plays out is going to be determined by the elections. But if Mastriano loses for the governor in Pennsylvania, Herschel Walker, who we talked about, loses, Carrie Lake, the Trump-aligned candidate for governor in Arizona. We've got to purge this element from our party. I do think it's almost historically unprecedented. When Grover Cleveland lost the presidency and came back, but I don't think there was a cult of Cleveland personality. Whereas there is, Trump is is a cult of personality leader, and he's got the Republican Party in his grip, either authentically with his partisans or people who are afraid to say what they really think. So that's one line of recrimination, and the other is going to be if. Republicans do, thanks to all the factors that Kate described and others have described, have a decent election, and Trump is out there as a plausible 2024 campaign. We're really going to see this deep anxiety that's not hard to find really with any Washington Democrat. Concern about President Biden, concern about Vice President Harris and how unpopular she is. also in approval ratings and saying, oh, look, this can't be our ticket. Too much is at stake. We can't risk a return of the Trump presidency. So I think that what happens on November 7th is going to be interesting. What happens in the couple months after November 7th is going to be very interesting.
Clarence?
I was thinking of so many answers, I forgot your question.
Trump
But,
and
one-
Biden.
Well, for one thing, you made a very good point last night and your presentation over here about the Miller Center in the Q&A that if Biden thinks Trump is going to be the candidate, he's more likely to stay on the ticket. Otherwise, he'd be more likely to drop out. I think he's setting things up, and other Democrats are setting things up well for that to happen, because you see some other potential, the Florida governor, he is a rising star, and who Donald Trump hates for it. And his negative endorsement is a big endorsement in a lot of people's minds who want to have Donald Trump without the headaches. Biden himself, I think, I mean, I'm 75 for heaven's sake. Biden's a few years older than me. I'm not fit enough to be president. So if I can't endorse me, I mean, at a certain point, as my son says, it's time to move on, prepare the way for who comes next, be the John the Baptist here, and prepare the way. And I think a lot of folks, but with gratitude, I think the biggest endorsement from Democrats of Trump's power is Joe Biden's nomination. That the fact that at a time when the Democrats were divided as to who they could put up against Trump, here come Black folks in South Carolina and Jim Clyburn, who give Biden his first primary victory there. All of a sudden, over the course of the next few days, I was watching very closely all the other Democratic candidates one by one drop out. It was obvious there was just an inertia going in that direction. People just wanted beating Trump was the number one issue. So yeah, Trump is the most unifying factor outside the Democratic Party when it comes to unifying Democrats. I think that I mean, I find it hard to believe that we're going to get all the way to 2024 without Trump being indicted. But life is full of surprises. Nevertheless, it rattles my faith in the system when all of our inefficiencies at making politicians accountable begin to get shaken up and seem as rattled as much as they are. And remember, I'm from Chicago now. I've been covering. I came from Ohio, where there was no corruption at all, I go to Chicago for several decades, like so many other young reporters, right, John, who want to see politics at its rawest. Now we're in a situation where I'm seeing I've seen so many Chicago Pauls go off to the slammer who deserved it. And everybody knew it for years. Now, when are they going to get them? And most of them finally got. So I watched Donald Trump dancing down the highway. We'll see what happens with him now. But all those, anything else you want to know about Trump and Biden?
Well, Mary Kate, how much is this on the minds of Republican candidates, pro or con?
Oh,
Are there some that want Trump to campaign for him and have had Trump campaign for them, or some that want them to stay very far away from the state or the district as
I
possible?
mean, I can't speak for everybody, but it does seem to me that everybody was watching very closely the way Glenn Youngkin threaded the needle. And it seems to me the way forward is for Republican candidates to talk about some of the issues that Donald Trump stood for, and not necessarily take Trump on with all the baggage of his personality. And I think many Republicans supported what he was doing, but when January 6th happened, that kind of changed things. And so when you see the Biden, like that Philadelphia speech where he painted with such a broad brush, trying to say that Republicans who have reasonable views on social issues, on abortion, on the economy, to suddenly be sort of semi-fascist, ultra MAGA, painting with this very broad brush. I think that really started the backlash of, oh, no, we're not. We are the party of the working class people. And that's what we're seeing in some of these numbers on the economy and on crime, on immigration. The more Republicans focus on those issues, the more their numbers go up. The more they focus on Trump and some of the hot button issues like abortion, the numbers go down. So the smartest thing strategically is to have the reasonable Republican agenda that appeals to the former Trump voters without the baggage of Donald Trump's personality. I'm not convinced he's going to run. I think he's got his hands full. I think they decided yesterday to subpoena him. I think it'd actually be great if he testified before the committee. I don't think his lawyers are going to let him do that, because if part of the deal is he wants to be live and unedited, which I can understand why he would demand that. But the lawyers will say the chances of you saying something live under oath that you should not say is sky high. So I can't imagine his lawyers are going to go for it. But I think most of us feel that the January 6th hearings, we haven't heard the other side. Let's hear him defend what happened. Let's hear the defense. There is no defense right now. It's all prosecution.
Defense.
Then let's hear that. Let's hear him say that. You
I've
know,
watched every minute of these.
that would be
hearings,
damning.
like, no,
Yep.
this is such a Republican talking point. This is the problem, I think. I'm sorry, but here's the problem. Donald Trump's approval rating or disapproval rating has not moved. It's moved a total of 1.8 points since these hearings began. If you're right, and there are all of these reasonable Republicans out there who don't embrace Donald Trump, but who embrace the power of the party and what the party stands for, then these Republican candidates should be doing fine, and Donald Trump's approval rating should have taken a hit, because reasonable, normal people out there have watched what's going on. They've seen insurrectionists storm the Capitol. They've seen Mike Pence in hiding, and they saw Donald Trump gleefully watching. But that's not what's happening. Instead, what's happening is that the Republican Party's fortunes are traveling along with Donald Trump's. And I don't understand how that's actually possible, unless people are willing to say, you know what? Maybe I don't like Donald Trump's personality, but I think that this election was rigged and stolen, and I'm going to support him anyway. The data just don't back up the point that there's this huge disconnect between Republican values and priorities and their attitudes about Trump. The data go hand in hand, and I believe the data. Sorry.
I do. Can I just say that I think there is a difference between people who you're talking about who believe the election was rigged and stolen, and there's a broader crowd, I believe, who had legitimate concerns about changing rules during COVID. And now that COVID's over, how are we going to handle voter ID and mail-in ballots and all the other things, separate from whether the election was stolen, that there are legitimate concerns about our elections and how we're going to move forward post-pandemic. And that's it.
And I think
That doesn't make
Democrats-
you ultra MAGA.
No, I think
and yeah.
Democrats have those concerns too. Right? Virginia this time around for the first time is doing same day registration. You can register up
Mhm.
until the day. That's great in that it's going to enfranchise a lot of people, but obviously there are limitations and administrative issues associated with all of that. I don't question any of that. What I'm saying is that it's very difficult to see a disconnect between the Republican Party's attitudes toward Trump and their attitudes toward Republican principles and values when these two trend lines are moving exactly in tandem.
I love this. I feel like I'm back on McLaughlin group again. Goodness,
Come to our
that'd be
class.
great. Oh, yeah.
But that would require me as the moderator, at least from the Saturday Night Live version, to say, wrong, the real answer is.
For me, a Saturday Night Live version. That's where Dana Carvey got it. He learned.
Bill, can I say two quick things on that? As a little off the midterms, where I was stimulated by both Jen and Mary Kate. I mean, one, the notion that a high turnout is always good for Democrats. I think Donald Trump undermined that. He gained 13 million votes between 2016 and 2020. I mean, the problem is he not only motivates his base, but he similarly motivates the other side's base. That's basically the problem, by the way, for any kind of we've got two different schools of how to run a campaign. There's a persuasion campaign. Let's go out and see if I can be reasonable with this person and pull her over to the other side. The great theme of politics these days is motivate and stimulate the base. The reason that's not a promising brand of politics long-term really for either party is everything you do to motivate your own base is simultaneously motivating the other side. And there's a lot of people who don't vote in placid times, both people who tilt Democrat and people who would, with the right kind of Republican, and Donald Trump will come out. The other thing I will say is just, well, this is my big theme as a journalist, the nature of polarized politics is really alarming precisely because it removes the mechanism of accountability in a democratic culture. If you don't care about anything you learn about the other side because you're fundamentally viewing politics in a tribalistic way, which side are you on? It removes the levers of accountability in the system. All anybody has to do, no matter what kind of either policy flaw or sort of personal ethical flaw that they commit, all they need to do is rally their side and they can get off unscathed. Where is the price to be paid in that kind of environment? It's really alarming.
That's my big sermon too. I was very disturbed when Donald Trump came along and announced right up front this scare campaign. They're gathering at the borders. They're coming to steal your children and blah 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 blah. And I said, oh, this is out of Hollywood. But people bought it, and that was the beginning. When politics get that polarized, then they don't listen to reason or anything besides Fox News. But I think to a large degree, the Republicans are right when they say Democrats do it too. I mean, I felt the same way when you had the Monica Lewinsky scandal. It just seemed unfair to me in so many ways for not just Clinton, but mainly the whole Clinton agenda to suddenly be frozen over this issue. And so I could see, well, as the whole debate went along and the whole impeachment trial came along, it became more and more like me and other people who wanted to find some defense for Clinton found it. Because it was just becoming more and more apparent day by day that there were bigger concerns, and I think that's where tribal politics begin. Really, happens with both parties, and it's you're absolutely right, John, that folks are losing that sense of the importance of accountability. But really disturbed me, and I'll shut up for the moment, is when I saw that that the very national security of the country was not being held in high enough esteem that people wanted accountability from the president after January 6th. That the fact that the numbers have not moved is a great disappointment to me. And well, anyway, that's a big one. How do we make this as important as the Willie Horton campaigns and all the other issues that come along that excite people, mostly with anger, but not the more long-term issues like the health of our republic, our democratic republic. So that's something that I think we're going to move down the road a bit after this election. If Donald Trump does one way or the other get politically defeated, then we will see an honest debate when folks like DeSantis and others come along and see what kind of answers they have.
So I want to pick up off that. I think you've answered one of the questions here, which is what role the January 6th panel and committee has had on the election. But if people want to say more about the hearings themselves, I'd love that. But I think it does raise a really interesting question, particularly on where the Democrats perhaps maybe not have acted well, which is getting your opinion about the Democratic Party in the primaries steering resources toward the Trumpish candidate in the theory that they were more likely to be defeated in the November election. Jen, can I put you on the spot on that one?
Yeah, so it's like an ethical person, that's terrible. Strategically speaking, finally, the Democrats are willing to play hardball. I mean, sorry, like, and for the most part, as far as I can tell, they did not jeopardize the democracy by doing this, and that there are not all of these, election deniers who were elected who are now in very competitive races who are going to knock off Democrats. So the strategy, at least, does not seem to have backfired. And, we've had voters engage in strategic voting through the years. We've had donors do it. I think the fact that the parties decided this time around that it was worth a shot. Sure, it's an unattractive way to behave in that you're trying to defeat these people because of what they believe and you're propelling them so that you can take them on. But they were strategic in where they did it. And even though it might be a hard pill to swallow, it's the only way that you win control. And Republicans have been doing this for a long, long time.
Have you followed those races? Is it clear in the cases where Democrats supported more extreme Republican candidates that won, that they now look like they might lose? Is it going to work?
It looks like it is. I mean, I don't know of any high profile examples where it seems that it's going to backfire.
I have some
Pennsylvania?
numbers.
Well, I mean, in the Pennsylvania governor's race is going to be fine,
Mhm.
right? So I think Josh Shapiro is going to win that race. And I think that it would have otherwise been closer. And so I think that it's, again, it's sort of like yucky and it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But at the end of the day, if you win control, you suck it up.
Mary Kate?
Can I, please?
Yeah, please.
53 million was spent by the Democratic Governors Association and the Senate Majority PAC led by Chuck Schumer in 13 primaries. There were 6 governor's races. They did it, 2 Senate races, 5 House races. And they were successful in 6 out of 13 getting those people elected. But I would say, I find it
Getting those people nominated.
nominated, sorry. I find it very disturbing. I don't see how you can say that these people are a threat to our democracy, that they are semi-fascists, all these horrible things, and then give them money. I find it very cynical. I think this erodes trust in politics. I find it reprehensible. So I feel very differently than Jen does, but I don't understand how you can have it both ways and say these people are evil while you're giving them money.
Does transparency matter, though? I mean, it's very.
At least we
you've been
found out
very
about
upfront
it. Yeah, at least we
Yeah.
found out about it.
It
Yeah.
didn't take a lot of detective work.
Yeah.
though.
But I think it erodes trust in politics.
It's hard to erode trust when no one trusts the government, right? So I mean,
Yeah. 2 rights don't make a wrong, though. I have a real problem with it.
John?
It's profoundly cynical and in the culture of accountability that I would wish for, but that we don't have. There would be a price to be paid for that kind of transparently cynical and dishonest.
I'm shocked there's cynicism in politics.
So it's
Here we are in
Yeah.
Casablanca. From the webinar, it seems that whoever wins the next 2 years will be, thank you, Alfred, will be a stalemate. Are there any issues that such a Congress can resolve? Or that is, and I'm guessing this assumes Republican takeover at least one house of Congress. Are there any issues such a Congress can resolve, or will we just see 2 years of political posturing for the presidential election in 2024? And I may offer an answer after you guys have gone, but I'm assuming you're going to say what I'm going to say. So,
you should take a swing at it.
well, I think it's quite striking that if you go back to the last year of the Trump presidency and the first 2 years of the Biden presidency, how much bipartisanship there's actually been in legislating. We had probably the biggest, not as a percentage of GDP, but certainly in dollar terms in the last year of the Trump presidency, the biggest action of the federal government ever, with nearly $4 trillion of spending just in 2020 alone. And then another $1.9 trillion of spending, which was done on a partisan basis, but followed up by a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. And then the CHIPS Act, the collaboration between Democrats and Republicans in supporting Ukraine, 40 or $50 billion of spending for Ukraine, not to mention uniform approval of Sweden and Finland joining NATO. The enormous acts of bipartisanship in the last 2 years have been totally forgotten or underplayed in the press, in my humble opinion. And some of that, I think, is actually in response to what appears to be the existential crisis in our democracy. I think many Democrats and Republicans realize that the system is so fragile that they have to figure out a way to come together. They acted on gun control legislation of all things, maybe other than abortion, the most polarizing thing in American politics. So I'm just kind of struck by, as dysfunctional as it is, somehow it's still working. Am I wrong?
Well, it is working to a certain degree, especially if you are talking about an issue that's not a top priority with the voters out there. Foreign policy has seldom been that high of a priority outside of wartime, and even then, still a priority. But still, Americans tend to agree more often. And that was where Ukraine, it looked a little dicey there at first, but as you said last night, Biden did fortunately a good job of keeping the alliance together and all. I think I'm wondering about, I've been wondering that same question about what would happen if the Republicans take the Congress and Joe Biden's, they're stranded. I personally think that there's room for some action on the border, which, or as Democrats call it, immigration. I mean, it's like we're polarized even in our language now, but the Republicans always complain, he hasn't even been to the border. And I say, well, okay, I go to the border, but it's that has got so many aspects to it. Don't try to do a mammoth bill that covers the whole issue, but pick out different aspects of it that Democrats and Republicans can come to agreement on and negotiate like crazy. That's what really has worked with healthcare. It's what we've seen with some of the other issues here in recent years, that if you break down the big package, well, like in regard to the economy, we break down the big package into smaller pieces and negotiate those. That's Joe Biden's style. I think he can adjust to the issue and the time. So we'll see what happens.
I'm gonna, you guys might not know this about me, but I worked in 1994 at the Republican National Committee when the contract with America was being written and distributed and was very successful. So I'm a big proponent of laying out your mandate in advance, what your agenda is going to be if you're elected. And so Kevin McCarthy put out the commitment to America probably 2 weeks ago. It did not get covered by the press, which is not a surprise to me. And he wasn't as specific as the contract with America, which had actual pieces of legislative language attached. But he was giving broad principles and issues that they're going to move forward to. And I think that is exactly what the Republicans should be doing. It seems to me that Trump is very backward looking. He wants to keep relitigating 2020. If the Republicans keep the trains moving forward with a positive agenda, I think that's exactly what will happen if they win the House. And the fact that McCarthy put it out, not the RNC, is huge. And so I'm, again, cautiously optimistic. Maybe I'm naive, but I'd like to think there's some hope that they'll work together on a few things.
I'm rooting for you.
Thank you. Keep it alive. She thinks there's no hope. No.
I mean, I think that we've already seen the Republicans have said they plan to hold hearings to impeach Biden. They've told Merrick Garland to get his papers in order because all they plan to do is investigate. I mean, they're going to use the next 2 years as a partisan witch hunt, and they can, and because the presidential election begins on November 9th. So I just think there's really very little incentive for Republicans in the House to hand Biden even one bipartisan victory. In the last 2 years, there were some incentives because, some of these Republicans were retiring and not seeking re-election, but also it's unclear how pivotal they were. Because Republicans voted for the infrastructure bill, because Republicans voted for some of the pieces of Build Back Better, Nancy Pelosi was able to release some Democrats who would have otherwise been in a tough situation had they had to vote for it. But I'm not convinced that they wouldn't have voted for it. So I'm not sure that the kind of bipartisanship that we saw on some of these pieces of legislation was actually required. And if it wasn't, and if there was really very little incentive, there would have been little incentive to do it. I can't imagine any incentive for McCarthy and the Republicans to get anything done. They win in 2024 by taking down every single item of the Biden agenda and explaining that everything that they've wanted to pass, the Senate and the president have been unwilling to advocate for.
This is where I would be concerned about Biden's lack of traditional presidential skills. Like the great power of the presidency historically has been the power of that platform, the ability to set the agenda, to articulate it. And the president, you served Bill Clinton. he found pretty quickly after losing the House in 1995, he didn't want that. It wouldn't have been what he chose, but said, well, the circumstances I have, actually, there's a fair amount of freedom for me here to separate myself from my party, to selectively identify issues that can work to my advantage, and to pressure Republicans surgically. They hated him just as much as Republicans hate Joe Biden, and actually get things done. But in order to do that, you have to be pretty nimble and energetic. Barack Obama did the same thing, got slaughtered in the 2012, or excuse me, the 2010 elections. He said, what, minus 64 seats or something like that. But came back and shellacked was his term, and an accurate one, but came back and was clearly the commanding candidate in 2012. But in order to do that, you have to show rhetorical skills, the ability to frame a national argument, the ability to pin Republicans up against their vulnerabilities. That's not historically been Biden's strength. That he's not an eloquent, he was never an eloquent politician, or especially keen strategic thinker, even when he was much younger. So. I do think there would be opportunities where you have to look for what's in people's interest. They're not fundamentally driven by altruism, except on a handful of the biggest issues. They're looking at self-interest, and how can you use that self-interest? I could think there would be some Republicans who do want to separate from the Trump agenda. The way to do that without taking on Trump personally, the Glenn Youngkin approach, would be to say, sure, I'll pass this because I think it's better for my district, it's better for the country. But the opportunities are, I agree with Jen on this, the opportunities are very narrow.
So we've just got 2 minutes left. The final lightning round. Any question from the audience? Any potential presidential frontrunners emerge from the midterms from either party, other than Trump and Biden? In other words, do you see people coming out of these midterm elections that we should be looking for running for the presidency in 2024?
I know it's not technically a midterm, as we were discussing, but I'm going to say DeSantis. DeSantis has raised something like $188 million and is putting a lot of it into the races down ticket in Florida to build a Republican team. Donald Trump raised $100 million and has not given it to anybody. And so I think that DeSantis is coming across as more of the team player and future of the Republican Party. So I would say DeSantis is going to come out very well.
Clarence?
Well, first of all, coming from Illinois, a lot of people are talking about Pritzker running for president. Funding is no problem for him. He has been very successful as governor, but it's Illinois, for Pete's sake, where the Republicans haven't been much of a force in decades now. And there's even when they've had recent Republican governors, but I see that as a possibility. I want to see how Beto O'Rourke does. If he pulls off a miracle and wins the governor's race in Texas, then obviously he's going to be strong coming out of the gate. Other than that, I'll let other people guess. I'm going to pull my darts out and throw them at the map.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to make educated guesses after we see who pulled off an upset and we're like, oh yeah, they're the new rising star. But I would say that Pete Buttigieg is the one who is to watch because he is the most effective spokesperson for the Biden administration, I think. And that's it. And he got the infrastructure bill passed. And he wants to take on the airlines and make sure that they pay for your hotel reservations, right? Which is something everybody cares about when your flight gets canceled. So I think I think he understands how to communicate on a real basis with people. And he's had a relatively low profile in that he's only doing what the administration is asking him to do. So if Biden decides that he's not going to run, I would say that he would be a strong front runner. He also represents huge generational change and just a completely different face of politics.
John?
Secretary Buttigieg is, he's obviously a really impressive figure. I think Vice President Harris would, if President Biden didn't run, would really be the commanding figure, the person to knock off in that environment. She's got some liabilities in her political standing currently, but that might cause people to overlook formidable strengths. I don't really see like a specific candidates on the ballot this year. Like I'm really watching that person because I think they're the next wave. I think we urgently need as a country, as Clarence suggested, we urgently need that next generational wave. I think this rancid era of politics that we're in, with respect to an audience that might tilt a little on the older side, but I don't think we're going to get past this this kind of this era of remorseless partisan and ideological and cultural conflict until the sort of baby boom generation that basically started this battle in the late 1960s until they're no longer relevant in American politics. And we'll have to see what the next generation brings on. Incidentally, lots of democracies, they're doing that. If you look at Justin Trudeau in Canada, you look at Emmanuel Macron in France. So the Finnish prime minister who's in her 30s, who did the TikTok dancing video. Her name I stumble over, but we're not in New Zealand has a prime minister in her 30s. Like all these Western democracies are making a generational change, and we're not. Zelensky is a perfect example. We're not in this country, so it definitely concerns me. I think the main thing that we're going to watch is I'm going to watch anyway, is not specific candidates, but the general verdict on Trumpy candidates. People trying to out Trump each other. What is that? If they do well, that points the mind in one direction. If they underperform or they lose the Republican Party victories that were easily within grasp, I think that's going to move the party a little more in Mary Kate's direction.
Well, I must say that the best part about this panel is that I didn't have to play the role of John McLaughlin and say wrong, because there was so much wisdom from our four panelists and our family members here. And to the rest of our family here, thank you all for coming. To the Miller Center staff that puts this together. As you all know, every week they do such a terrific job. And I think we owe our panelists and all of them a round of applause.